Hey everybody, how's it going? And once again, we have our next lecture. And we've again a lot to talk about. So please make sure that you watch from beginning to end, seeing some possible evidence that we're not. So so let's talk about that. I don't want to get too negative, but I as you know, I've been grading some of the papers. I mean, actually, not all we know that so far. As I'm taping this right now, or as I'm taping this right now, I'm actually I have most of them done, almost all of them done. I hope to have them all done by the time that by tomorrow morning, meaning Monday morning, which is when you'll see this tape. So anyway, I'm going to go over some of the things related to that, and then of course talk about some of the chapters in the book that we need to read, and also what our next assignment will be. Okay. Um, so a couple things to keep in mind here actually is, and let me go to the shared screen. Okay. A couple of things to keep in mind here. And of course, I always forget to enter the student view. So let's go to the student view. All right. So what do we have due? We have this obviously was due already. The first assignment, which again, I'm grading it back to you. Upcoming assignments. So we have the rewrite for the first profile graded assignment will be due in a week, October 4th. Okay. So again, like some of you asked me this question, anybody can rewrite. The only people who don't rewrite are the people who get an A. There's no need to. Based on what I've seen so far, nobody's got an A. So now here's the thing. Now an R, it means that you have to rewrite it. That's essentially the level of a D or an F, okay? Which is something grade I hate to give. And I actually have posted these grades actually in Canvas, which is something I haven't never done before. The reason why I haven't done that before is because they don't allow you to put in an R. So I don't know. I put in an R for a few people. I got people actually about 5 to 7 people got R's. So I did actually try to indicate there was an R there. I don't know if you're going to see it or not. Hopefully you will. But anyway, so we'll talk about that in a bit, what that means. But anyway, if you get an R, you have to rewrite, okay, or else you get an F, okay? That's the bottom line. If you haven't actually submitted the assignment yet, and about 3 or 4 of you haven't, that's an F because we're long past the due date, okay? Remember, I give a 24-hour grace period for that. If you get a C or higher, okay, other than an A, of course, it's voluntary. You can rewrite for a higher grade. I strongly suggest you do, okay? I strongly suggest that you actually do rewrite for a higher grade. So, especially if you get a B plus. I mean, to me, actually, I actually take that in consideration when class participation. I say, oh, cool, well, okay, you did very well on this assignment, and you got a B plus, so let's see the effort. Let's see you take it another notch, go for the A. And sometimes I've had people who are very talented at what they do and they reach that skill level, pretty quickly, which is fine. And then they won't rewrite for the A, and I'm kind of like, well, why? So, I mean, you're probably like really close, and I'll explain why, but you're not going to do it. So let's do it. So anyway, the rewrite is listed here. You'll see on your list here with everything else. It's mixed in with all these other assignments here, but here it is right here. First assignment, fall to 2021, rewrite profile of someone you know. Okay. All right. So you just submit your rewrite to this entry right here. Okay. So what does it mean to get the grade you got? Well, I put it in big lettering right here, and this is considered as a rubric. I know it's a very old-fashioned rubric. There's no points or anything like that. I do this very old-fashioned. I be an editor, and I look at to see if like you actually have a publishable story or not. And again, publishable means something on the lines of, again, something maybe could be printed in the Targum or the Patch or whatever, or some local paper, or even like something that's worthy of like a Facebook write-up or something, not New York Times. There's something that is coherent and meets my 3 tenets, okay, which is accuracy, clarity, and focus. It's something that I can basically understand from the top of the story to the bottom of the story. It stays on like one string. It doesn't, go off point. I'll show you like how a story can go off point in a bit. And it's understandable. There's like very few spelling mistakes or those mistakes of any sort. There's very little issues with like organization, clarity, anything like that. B plus to me is like close to that, but there might be like, I would say like there's some editing that is required. For instance, don't be intimidated by that because an A will require some editing too, but a B plus will be something along the lines of like maybe you have a paragraph that's like where you make an important point that's too low in the story. It should be like higher up, that sort of thing. Maybe you need a little bit more reporting to like, make the story a little clearer, or give the story a little more depth. A B is that, but probably a little bit more. I would say probably a little more organizational issues, a little more maybe issues with like punctuation, a little more with, but the bottom line with like B and up is that the story is publishable, I would say, but just needs some editing. Okay, something that I could probably like immediately like put into like publish on the web or in an old-fashioned dead tree newspaper, but it just requires some editing. I would say C and C plus is something that requires even more substantial editing. And usually what I do is if it's something that's organizational, especially organizational, or maybe like I see this a lot where like the main point of the story is buried, or maybe you kind of like, I see a lot of people who feel like they need to go and get it like establish some sort of a preface in their story where they have like a paragraph or two at the top where you feel like you need to like kind of get long-winded and like really do like a whole setup or something like that because maybe you were taught one time that was creative. Well, no, actually, I'm asking for people to actually get right to the point right away. Okay. But the bottom line is that, there's something about the story where I could still pretty much understand what you're writing about. And there's from top to bottom. And there's the story can be reworked to the point where it is understandable and makes sense. It's just mainly the organizational issue is making sure that you're staying focused and clear from top to bottom. That's the main thing. Okay. If it's not that, this is where the area where like focus and clarity kind of suffer a little bit. But like I said, there's the groundwork and a foundation for the reporting there to make this an A or B story. Okay. Anything that's D, F, or R. D is again, and again, when I give back the first assignment, if I give you an R, don't like cry over that or anything like that. I'm just saying that I don't like to give out a D or an F on the very first draft of an assignment. I'd rather you just rewrite it. So, what's the point? D and F is almost the same to me. So just basically, it's a story that lacks focus, organization. I don't really, and the bottom line is that I don't really get what you're writing about. It goes off focus. It's like it needs substantial reworking to the point where, it's the difference between, it's almost like this in a newsroom. If it's like an A to a C, it's something where I can, if there's any kind of issue, I as an editor can like work at it on my desk and fix it. If it's something lower than that, it's basically something that needs your attention because only you can fix it because you have, maybe it's deficient reporting or something like that. It needs to be kicked back. Kick back is the term I typically use. So maybe we kick it back to you and say, fix it or something like that. Okay. All right. So there's organization, there's accuracy issues. If I see like any kind of accuracy issues, that usually immediately sinks into the R. It depends. It really on the level of accuracy. You should try to get everything right and check all your facts. If I see like a spelling mistakes, that sort of thing. But if you get like a name spelled wrong, that's bad. Okay. As I described in my last lecture, you could actually get yourself into trouble if you actually misspell something. So, all right. So that's the deal with like what I look for in terms of assignment. Again, I really think everybody should try to actually lately, I'll be honest with you, I give the guy a lot more A's lately. It's because basically my point is try to get to a point, my goal is to try to get everybody to a point of actually publishing, getting their stories publishable. So, all right. So that's what we work towards. Okay. All right. So like I said, the grade, I'm looking over my list of things to do here. Grades are Canvas. I talked about the rewrite policy. Let me talk about a couple of things that I saw in these stories that were probably some of the major issues. I mean, there were organizational issues, stuff like that. I'll get to that in a bit, but like some of the issues that actually are covered in the book, um, and stuff that I've talked about, maybe I haven't, but also maybe some stuff I haven't actually talked about enough already. I mean, maybe they aren't really covered in the book. Okay. There's two actually like common mistakes that people make in stories, and it deals with essentially attribution, which actually deals with some of the reading we're going to go talk about today, and paraphrasing. Okay, so what you should know is actually that a news story essentially is a paraphrase. Most of it is a paraphrase. I like to tell people to write, interpret, okay? Write, interpret. I'm sorry, not interpret. Internalize. I'm not, oh my God. I apologize. That's bad. Listen, internalize. When you're actually like doing any kind of like any kind of interview or anything like that, you know, a lot of times actually reporters will actually sit down and they won't even write anything down right away. They'll just like listen. You know, because you've ever noticed that like when you're actually like you're sitting down, you're taking notes in the class, and and if you take like too many notes sometimes, you find yourself you're not really listening because you're not really understanding what's being said. You have to actually you know, it's actually like uh, more of an innate ability that humans have is to actually listen to understand as opposed to writing and then try to understand at the same time. It's not something you can really do at the same time. I always go back to this example. When I went to Rutgers a long, long time ago, there was a student by the name of Francine. I don't remember her last name, but she would write down everything that was said in the psychology class, every damn thing that was said. And what we would, I shouldn't admit this to you, but you know, that was actually it was actually the same time I was actually having Targa meetings. So sometimes it's a class. Oops, sorry. Yeah. So anyway, what we would do is we would look at her notes afterward, and we would say like, okay, and we actually would read them, and we actually ended up getting higher grades than she did. Not necessarily because we were smarter than her, but because she wasn't really listening to what was being said. She would just write down everything like a stenographer. Okay. So you should really listen and internalize, and then you write down your notes. And what you typically do is you don't write down everything that's being said, you summarize. Okay. All right. So you summarize. And then what you do is with quoting, you don't like necessarily take like a gigantic quote and slap it into a story. Okay. That's stenography. Okay. I realize that's like I've had people who will write things, they'll write like maybe a few sentences of their own, but they'll almost the entire story will be quote. That's an unreadable story. Okay. Quotes are always supposed to be used much more sparingly. Okay. They're supposed to be used like if somebody says something colorful and quippy. Okay. They're not supposed to be like something that like, um, something that I don't know is like, is supposed to actually like necessarily educate you on anything. It's supposed to actually humanize the story, and actually is something supposed to be along the lines of, um, like I said, like, something that's like a little unusual, they said, or something that actually kind of grabs you emotionally or something like that, or, something human. It's not, if somebody's like, one thing I often see is that somebody will quote somebody basically going over their resume or something like that, the things they do. That's not something you actually write in a quote. That's something you write on your own. You be an interpreter, not a stenographer. Okay. And the point is that like when a quote, actually quoting what somebody says, is that, when somebody actually is talking, they're not actually like necessarily saying things in a very coherent way. Okay. Unless let's say it's like a short quote, So it's your job as the professional writer to actually interpret what they say and write it in a way so that everybody can understand. Okay. Let me give you an example. What I saw in a couple of stories. Okay. Here's an example of when not to quote. Okay. Now that's why I wrote no. Okay. And it's like really hard to read. Another thing is that people tend to skip over quotes. Okay. So that's actually just kind of normal reading. They actually just look for the actual writing. They actually look for the writer to actually write something. And they want to learn the stuff from the actual writer, not necessarily from the person being quoted. Okay. So this is like a really long quote that's like hard to read. I hope to use my degree to work further in the research aspect, research shouldn't be capitalized, of biochemistry and molecular biology, since it will always be a field of work that is needed in the world. I currently work at the labs here at Rutgers and have continued to learn more about the subject. See how, I mean, that was like, just me reading that was actually just like kind of a mouthful, you know, that's not what you quote, okay? So what you would do is you would, you know, to get people to read that, you would say, woman's name was actually Samantha Brokaw. And it's also like a really long, so you would say something, said she, you can actually like usually cut down on words to hopes to use her degree to work to work more to, I would say, actually, she's talking about lanternflies, but to research lanternflies, period. You know, nice short, quick sentences. We will look into the aspect of biochemistry, and since it always be a field of work. Maybe here is the part, because there's a little bit of a colorful part. Maybe you do like a partial quote here. And be a field of work that is needed in the world. Okay. You can see I'm actually turning this into like 3 sentences, so it gives a reader a chance to pause. She currently works at the labs. Don't need here. It's at Rutgers, and this is that. And you know, obviously, she works at the lab. She's going to continue learning, right? So you don't need it. Okay. And then you still need to attribute, and that's actually something I want to go to too, is that we actually need to attribute more information. Something I haven't really talked much about, and I'm actually we'll be talking about very soon, but I talked about a lot in your stories I handed back to you. But you need to attribute information to a source. You need to tell, it's the journalism way of footnoting. You need to tell people like she said, he said, that sort of thing, so that people have an idea, like, you know, where the story is coming from. Okay. Even if it's like stuff that you paraphrase, you need to actually attribute information. I usually say like either she said or he said, like in the, you know, at least once every paragraph. Okay. All right. Here's an example of a good quote. Okay. Where actually paraphrasing was used effectively. The 2020 off season, I think it's actually hyphenated. Or actually, I think it's during the 2020. I need to cut that off myself. Crosby was itching to get back on the field, focusing on putting on muscle and getting his shoulder healthy for the upcoming season. This is actually no numbers at the beginning of a sentence. It's AP style. 2 weeks before returning back to campus, Crosby retore his right rotator cuff, requiring major surgery. I was devastated, he said. It's actually he said, he states. But that's actually the kind of emotional quote, you know, from the gut that we're looking for in terms for a quote. We're not looking for that big long bio that we added in between quotation marks. We're looking for this. I was devastated. It left a lot of uncertainty in my mind about my future in the sport. Quick, to the point, colorful. That's how you effectively use a quote. You know, there was the setup was this, you know, basically kind of just basically paraphrasing what the kinds of things he's going through. And then it goes to, you know, the short emotional, you know, almost like knee-jerk response. Okay. All right. So that's how you effectively use a quote. Let's talk a little bit about, like, that's another thing I saw, actually, just a couple other points here. Samantha Brokaw, that was one of the stories I saw this name was being used around. Samantha Brokaw, I would see this, you know, usually I saw there was one person who actually identified their source just by one name. That's not what we do in this class. Okay. That's essentially considered an anonymous source. You fully identify people. You say Samantha Brokaw, whatever. Okay. And then you fully identify by their name. We only use anonymous sources because when we're dealing with sensitive information, that's the kind of stuff that, like, you know, people do to, like, when they're uncovering stories about the Trump or the Biden White House or something like that. Okay. We don't do that here. Okay. So you basically just have Samantha. You would have Samantha Brokaw, the first name. Okay. Identify, and the last name identified first. Then I saw this actually way too common, where you would identify the person by their first name later on in the story. Well, we don't do that either. Actually, here's two reasons why we don't do that. First of all, it's actually a little bit too common of a name. Second of all, people are usually more readily identified by their last name. It's also considered more objective, okay? So we actually, on second and future references, we identify the person by their last name, okay? Everybody got that? So, bro call. I'm actually talking to you like you're in my room right now. I keep saying, everybody got that? All right, so that's what we do. First reference, full name, and then second and future references, last name, okay? Okay, attribution. It's something I talked about, again, like I said, when I graded your assignments and I sent them back to you. All right, so when do we attribute? Well, again, I've touched on this a little bit already, but let me just talk about it again here. Attribution, it's used when, okay, when you're trying to identify, when you have essentially opinions that are in a story, okay? I also saw people actually writing stories like with inserting their own opinion and stuff like that. It's not what we do in a news story. We don't insert our own opinions. We also don't have first person, no first person. Let me go over that again. No first person, that means I and we, okay? We only do second persons because that's third person because that's objective, okay? That's he, she, and it, or the person's name, okay? So we attribute when we have opinions in the story, so he said, she said, whatever. And also we attribute when there's little known facts. So I know I've gone over this before, but again, Biden is president. That's a well-known fact. So that doesn't need attribution, okay? And this is something that comes up a lot, right? It's like such a joke, but whatever. Biden was not lawfully elected. That's it. That's an opinion, okay? Or how about this? Biden, I actually think botched Afghanistan. Okay, well that could be like a lot of people think that's a fact, but other people don't. Okay, so that should be attributed. Okay, so that would be maybe a little known fact. I want to call it that. Okay, or even an opinion. Okay, so that's when we do that. Okay. There are different types of actual attribution, okay? I mean, not attribution, the way we sourcing, okay? So attribution is sourcing, okay? So we are on the record here, okay? That means that like we put people's names on the record, Samantha Brokaw, we don't like fool around with that. We have people talk on the record, okay? We have them basically say things that we can use for print, okay? Off the record is when they tell you things that you can't use, okay? Now, there's a reason why people still go off the record. It's actually an effective tool for a lot of reporters. A lot of reporters object to it. They don't think it's right. They think that anything anybody says should actually be like said on the record. But this actually, I believe, can be an effective tool to use. So why do people go off the record and why do reporters allow it? And even though they can't use that stuff for print, well, the idea is that you might actually find out some stuff that you won't find out any other way. Okay, if you find out maybe things in the Trump White House, something like that, you might have to go off the record first. The idea, though, is to try to go, once you get that off the record information, is to try to find somebody to go on the record and confirm that information. Okay, so you might first learn it this way, but then you'll have to maybe find another source somewhere who actually will confirm it this way, okay? Or there's actually an in-between here, and that's actually called background, okay? Or without attribution, which is, again, not something we do in this class, okay? But that's where you basically have these sources said, okay? Or like who will only go by their first name or something like that. Again, that's what we're only do like, again, if you have like a sensitive information where maybe somebody is actually going to be like identified or something like that, it can actually hurt them. We're not going to do that in this class, okay? Maybe you'll do that in a class later on if you stick with journalism or whatever, but not in this class, okay? All right, but background with attribution, that's the sources said, an unidentified source said, that sort of thing, okay? There's also another term, which we definitely won't go into this class, but that's deep background. That's where actually you might print something without having any attribution attached to it at all. And Look, I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. I mean, you're in your later future career. That's something again that they did like in Watergate or something like that when when Nixon resigned, the president 50 years ago or something. I mean, that's what they did because the idea there is that you're actually using information, and if you actually did like say a source said, that actually might be a giveaway because there might only be like one or two people who actually know that information, and then even though you're going anonymous with the person, they'll know who it is. So to try to protect that identity, you'll go deep background. You won't even use a source. We don't do that in this class. Okay, so we basically just stick to on the record. Okay. All right. All right. So that was a little bit off point, but let me go back to like a story that I was looking at that maybe had some of the issues that I talked about that maybe would be sync the story to into an R territory. Okay. All right. So just give me a second here. Sorry. Just give me one. Stop it. Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. I'm sorry. Go back and share the screen with you guys again. All right. All right. So this is actually the story I was referring to before. See, one thing I was telling people was to really try to avoid these preface. I mean, I understand like we're trying to do here and this, but this is actually like, just a bit much, I mean, sometimes when people like feel like they need to kind of like have some sort of sub or something like that, it's actually leads to basically stating the obvious. I think a lot of people who are all around Rutgers right now know that there's probably an issue right now on campus and don't need to be reminded of that. Okay, that we're seeing a lot of these lanternflies land around all over the place. It's like, oh, weird. So I was trying to tell this reporter was basically try to stick with like the person and the theme, and that is Samantha Brokaw has become increasingly concerned. Okay. So that would be a good unique angle, to like look at is this person has this concern. Unfortunately, this story, and I mean, I don't mean this, and I think is like a criticism, like there's nothing personal about this. But what I saw was I saw a lot of people kind of shift away from like this, from the unique premise, because what they would do is they would go into like a lot of background about that person, things that happened a long time ago, and they wouldn't get into what's happening now. I would want to really know what's going on right now. What we're talking about something that's unique about this person. Let's get into the present. Okay. So anyway, what we have here is basically like we suddenly like kind of engage into a story that kind of goes on and on about lanternflies. Okay, but that's basically going off focus. Okay, and it have Samantha talking a lot about lanternflies. Lanternflies are everywhere on campus. I could walk, blah, blah, blah. If they don't start doing something about the lanternflies, they'll have drastic effects on the environment, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But it doesn't really talk about why she's so specifically into it. This is supposed to be a story about her, not a story about lanternflies. So we really need to kind of like refocus the story around that idea. That is, it's really kind of a narrow line sometimes. Like when you're writing a story, and you really got to make sure that it's something that's actually focused on a specific unique topic. You really got to make sure that actually it stays on that topic, because it's so easy to just kind of shift off it. So it's the kind of thing that like where you feel like you get like this kind of urge, this kind of pull, like, well, lanternfly is a really interesting subject, and you might say to yourself unconsciously, like, it's actually more interesting than her, and you find yourself going in that direction. Well, no, this story is actually about her. And why would people care about her more than lanternflies? Well, first of all, like if they want to read a story about lanternflies, they'll read something about it, read something else, okay, about lanternflies, something that's specifically themed around that, with scientists and people like that, in which she kind of is. But I mean, all the experts in the state and everything quoted and everything. Okay. This is actually a story for people maybe like in her hometown. They want to read about her. They want to read about like what's new with her, what's happening with her, that sort of thing. So we want to stick on her, and they might read this and they'll say like, okay, if I wanted to read a story about lanternflies, I'll read another story. Okay. I want to know what's happening with Samantha. Okay. So they'll stick with this. Okay. And then like we got more about lanternflies here. Yeah, here we go. Samantha. That was actually a common issue I had with a lot of stories. It should really say Brokaw. Okay. On second and future references. Okay. Um, there's more about her and like, she kills them on her own, which is what a lot of people do. Um, and then we got like first person entering here, and I was like, no, not that. We took some time to learn about Samantha and her studies. No, you don't do that. You basically get to be a fly on a wall in journalism. This is about being objective. Brokaw talked about her studies at Rutgers and how she hopes to use this to her advantage in coming years. And actually, what we learn, this is actually a paragraph about Samantha. Okay, this is what we want to read in this story. This is actually more of what I was hoping to see. Why does actually Samantha care about lanternflies? Why is it such a big deal to her? Why does she care? Why should we care about Samantha and her interest in that? Because this is what she does. It's something actually she studies and this sort of thing. So this story needed to stay focused on that. Okay, not on lanternflies. Okay. All right. So I could go on about that forever, but let me move on. Okay. So we talked about attribution, that sort of thing. We talked about quotes. All right. So let's see here. One thing I would like you to do, one thing I'm going to do when I actually send out an email to you guys, I'm actually going to send out my how to write a news story generic video that I created I think about a year ago or so. And I want you just something that I want you to make sure you guys have and you can use as a refresher and that sort of thing. And, really, because I know that maybe some of you have written news stories before, I've had them published, that sort of thing, but it could serve as a good refresher. I don't pretend to know everything in the world, okay? But I just feel like it's something that, it's good for people to have if they're actually because every once in a while, especially when I was younger and everything, I would feel like I, would kind of lose my way. I would feel like sometimes I'd have organizational issues because I wasn't really concentrating. And this would be like a couple years into my job. So I felt like I needed to kind of refresh the material in my head, or whatever, every so often just to keep myself focused on my job and focused on my stories. Okay. All right. Anyway, so let's go to the book. Okay. So I had you guys read, let's see here. Let me just make sure I got it right. I asked you guys to read chapters 5, 6, and 10. So let's talk about this. And this actually deals with some of the issues we dealt with, especially like attribution, that sort of thing already, like libel. So basically, interesting thing about libel, and I have to go over this in this class, even though it's probably a better subject really for media ethics, which is another class I've taught, and I will probably continue to teach. Is that the thing about it? As they identify here, here's the elements of a libel suit, but the thing is that it's really hard to actually sue somebody successfully for libel. It's really like something that actually is not necessarily like something that is done on a regular basis. Okay, but this chapter does go into it here. It says a person who files a libel suit involving a statement published in mass media must prove certain elements. Different authorities have different requirements, but here are 6 generally recognized parts of a libel suit. There's defamation. Communication is defamatory. It is likely to injure the plaintiff's reputation. Identification, defamatory communication. Probably the 2 big things you should really know actually about libel is that the difference really between libel and slander. Okay. Let me just get rid of some of this stuff right here. Libel is when you essentially defame somebody. And slander is when it's spoken. Okay. Sometimes they can be kind of mixed in the two, but anyway, I just want to kind of identify these things. But the main thing is I want to really kind of identify why should we really even care about this? Okay. All right. So let me go back to where I was. All right. Anyway, actually, I'm just going to kind of skip through some of this chapter, but again, there's just basically kind of an overview about what are some of the things that actually will cause you to go to court, and what are some of the things that actually will be considered like an injury, and that basically something that actually essentially harms people's reputations. This says here, the major defense in libel suit is truth, and there's a reason for that, and that is because it's not just truth, actually. It's also a matter, and we'll talk about privacy too a little bit, but it's not just that, but the thing about it is that is the courts have identified that like reporters are human, and you might actually, um, be in a situation where you might like print something and you might not get it right. Okay. And one of the main things you need to learn is that up until 1964, I would say, that was like a huge problem for people, for reporters, because if they did get something wrong, and they actually could be sued, and they could get in trouble, and they could be a libel suit or something like that. What happened was in 1964 was the Times v. Sullivan case. Okay. Again, this is something more for like, I would say, media ethics, but the Times v. Sullivan, that's the New York Times versus Sullivan. Okay. And that's basically the case that identified that essentially, you can't really actually libel somebody unless there was a reckless disregard for the truth. So that's basically like, okay, so you got it wrong, but you also just didn't care or didn't even really try to get it right. Okay. Maybe you work, because, people, there's many times like your reporters will actually work really hard and try to get it right, but they don't, but they'll get it wrong anyway, because maybe like whatever information they got was, they were told was wrong. Okay. But there's also another thing too, that's actually malicious intent. And that's actually where you not only have like basically like don't care enough to actually get it right, but you actually have like some sort of an agenda, which actually, we, to be honest with you, we see a lot more of that in journalism now, don't we? See a lot of people with agendas and things like that. So I would say that actually, that actually has made it a very high hurdle for people to actually like successfully sued and actually get damages in the form of money, because you actually have to prove that you actually intend to harm somebody, and maybe it's unconscious, but you do, and you don't care enough to even get it right. Those two things. So that's the only way to like get libeled. I realize that the Supreme Court has actually gotten a lot more conservative lately and that sort of thing. So actually, it's probably gotten a lot easier for this kind of thing to happen, perhaps. But that is the situation as we speak. Is that it actually really have to have malicious intent, reckless disregard for the truth. Okay. Um, so if you do get something wrong, then you don't have to worry about sue. Then why do you have to worry about getting something wrong then? Well, there is actually something that it's not necessarily the part of the law or case law or case precedent or anything like that, but it's credibility. Okay. If you're somebody who gets something wrong in a story, and especially if you don't actually retract it, then people are going to notice, and it's going to affect that publication's credibility. It's going to affect your credibility, and people will actually do things like, especially, I mean, people will do things like actually when you read a story, or will actually look for even some bylines sometimes. I saw that all the time. I worked for Patch. I mean, it was like Tom Davis, blah blah blah. You got it right. You go, good job, blah blah blah. But sometimes I've we would put out stories, and I have to admit, I wasn't like too confident about them. They'd be kind of clickbaity, that sort of thing. So I sometimes actually admit, especially early on when Patch we were trying things out, and I actually regret to say this, we got a little bit of a clickbait reputation. So my name was actually a bit attached to that. Clickbait meaning like kind of story where they would put out a headline and it wouldn't tell you everything you need to know, and then like, but it would just kind of give you, it would be something along the lines of like, these restaurants could kill you or something like that. Not that severe, but it would basically be like some sort of a tease that essentially would create like a bit of a false premise. Okay, that sort of thing. So, once too many of those headlines came out, it was a credibility issue, and that way it's almost like deception, So, yeah, that's what you have to worry about, is like, basically harming your own reputation because you're not being credible enough. Okay. All right. All right. We talked about sources and that sort of thing, and like basically the idea of, well, actually, like, when do you use a source for off the record? When do you use a source for non-attribution? Again, like the main thing is though, is that you want to make sure that, again, it's a credibility issue. You want to make sure that actually you're quoting your people, directly. And you want to make sure that actually, if they do say something, actually that's off the record or something like that, you want to make sure that actually that it, that it's not necessarily, that it's not going to end up in print. There's actually been some, it's interesting. There's actually been some debate on Twitter recently because Politico quoted somebody for a story that really didn't really need this, but they quoted somebody, a source who said off the record in their when they gave information or something like that, and the reporter printed the information, you know, and I like to think that's bad because then it goes to credibility, because I think that, you know, there's got to be a discussion. Okay. And when somebody says they want it off the record, what you should do is you should have a discussion with that person, and then say, like, look, I'd rather have this on the record. Okay. Or maybe like you feel like there's just no way that's going to happen anyway. So I'm just going to keep it off the record. Um, so anyway, so I would just say that, like, there's got to be some sort of a discussion after that. Okay. And then you know, then you know, then maybe you come to some sort of agreement. The actual, essentially, there's no real law, but it's like rule of thumb is that if when somebody says off the record, you really should be a mutual agreement on that, you know. Um, and but I think that you actually have to have some sort of a discussion first before you get to that, you know. And then what I do typically do is when somebody says off the record, I typically honor it. Okay, so. All right, so let's go to chapter 6. Okay, ethics, chapter 6. Again, it's telling ethics. I mean, again, this is actually like a whole other class that deals with things like this. I, you know, would actually really kind of defer to that more, but basically, kind of deals with the whole issue of, like, you know, what, you know, when you actually come up with a story or come up with an idea, like some of the things I mentioned before. Is it accurate? Is it something actually a little deceiving? You know, you want to make sure that, I mean, the problem with clickbait has become such an issue these days that, you know, it's almost like, you know, it's almost become regular habit. It's almost become, I think, a little bit too acceptable, you know. I mean, you know, even I called this up right here. NG.com does this a lot. Brace yourselves, New Jersey, another cold COVID winter is coming, you know. I mean, so what does that mean? You know, I've seen some models actually show it that it's actually going to go down, you know. So, you know, that could be like a little perceived, you know, a bit deceiving in itself, you know, because they're probably using this one model that I'm thinking of here, and they're not actually, like, really, like, you know, presenting necessarily a balanced view, that there's actually other models that are saying something different. Okay. So I would say that actually that's a bit deceiving right there, and that's a bit clickbaity, and that's the kind of things you got to take into consideration when you actually, like, come up with ideas, and you actually, like, you know, come up with headlines and things like that. Am I, like, being, because the truth is your best defense. Am I being as truthful as possible? Are people going to basically, you know, going to, stick with, like, you know, me, because, or they're going to feel like they're just being teased too damn much? Okay. All right. Let's go back to the book. Obviously, things like plagiarizing, making sure that, like, you know, finding sources, having credible sources is important. You know, not sources, try to, you know, sometimes it's fine to have a source that has an axe to grind or something like that, but sometimes it's like, you know, sources that have an axe to grind, you know, like, might, like, kind of exaggerate things and that sort of thing. I mean, sometimes the only way to get sources who might, like, actually give you information is, like, sources who have something to complain about. Okay. You can't really avoid that. But, you know, but you have to just make sure that, like, you know, that you thoroughly vet these people, that, like, that first of all, they're people who have a reputation for the truth. Okay. Do I really need to say that, like, plagiarizing is a bad thing? Okay. I mean, I know that's, like, you know, I sometimes when I read stories, I'll actually will see things, and I'll see things written, I'll be like, I've seen that somewhere, you know. So don't think that, like, it's something that you can get away with, you know. Okay. So in case you're wondering, I've actually caught people a few times. Okay. um you know, so yeah, plagiarizing is bad. It's not original. You want to make sure that actually, if you do actually use a source that, like, comes from somewhere or something like that, whether it's a written material or whatever, that you, it's fine that you do that as long as it's attributed to a source. Okay. Attribute to wherever source is coming from. You don't necessarily have to quote a person in a story. You're not always quoting a person in a story. You can quote, like, a book or a document or something like that. Okay. We'll actually be talking about that later on this semester. We'll actually be dealing with that a bit. Okay. Um, yeah, it's also good to protect yourself. I mean, so many reporters nowadays actually just record their stuff. I used to not do that, but you want to make sure that you don't become too reliant on that. Okay. You want to make sure that actually, you know, it's always important to actually, like, listen to what the person is saying, listen, internalize, write, summarize. And actually taking notes actually is the best way to do that. Taking and summarizing what somebody is saying, you'll find yourself like you would in a classroom, like actually really kind of internalizing if you actually take down what they're saying and actually summarize. Okay. So you want to like, it's actually good to always record things nowadays because now you can actually like transcribe notes and things like that. And that's actually really good to do. But, you want to make sure that actually like, you just don't rely on that as your, also if you're working fast, it's not always easy, even with today's modern technology, to actually go through, recorded material as it is actually to go through your notes. Okay. Obviously, you want to avoid things like freebies and stuff like that. Journalists actually have like kind of like lead like very boring lives because they can they don't have like they don't get like the freebies or the free tickets. But they do. I know they do it anyway. And I'm not completely like innocent in that regard, to be honest with you. But you want to make sure that like, sometimes you want to be like a politician. You have to actually like be as far removed from your source as possible. I know it's like difficult to do, but all right. Obviously you want to avoid things like opinion and speculation unless it's actually something that's attributed to a source. Okay. We don't really talk about photography in this class. Okay. Um, there's more here about actually like things like, again, like privacy and stuff like that. That's not really stuff that we really get so much into in this semester. I'm just really trying to deal with like the actual, writing end of things, making sure that especially that you have like clear and focus, oops, way of doing things. Okay. This goes into more about what I was talking before about when we actually like use quotes and attribution. I used to actually give even quotes about this stuff. And then, when to use direct quotations. Okay. It's, so basically, again, it's when do you use them? You use them sparingly, but you use them when you actually you want to have some quotes in a story because you want to actually humanize a story. With a story without quotes actually could be kind of boring. So you don't want to, when I say like you try to avoid these long quotes, I don't mean don't use quotes, okay? Because that can make the story very bland and boring, okay? But like it gives you it gives you an opportunity to let the sources talk to the reader, okay? Um, give the speaker's exact words when you can improve on them or match the speaker's wit, rhythm, again, emotion, especially if you're dealing with something like a tragedy or something like that. I know it's horrible to say that, but you want to like you want to give the reader like a feeling almost like you're there, and it's a feeling of empathy, oh my God, it's terrible. Especially if they say something controversial, usually that's something that's said in a short quote or quip. But if they say something that's awful like that, you don't necessarily, that's actually like a bad time to paraphrase. You want to make sure that they're actually quoted exactly. You want to make sure it's like everything is in the right context too. Okay. That's why it's actually good to paraphrase, because you want to make sure that like, is actually like set up that they were whatever they said, where they said it is, you want to like say where they said it, or like what was it. A lot of times you might want to say like, how did they respond, what question it was that was asked to them. Okay. All right. All right. Dealing with the slow internet again. All right. So, there's, more about indirect quotations here, but I just really want to kind of give you guys an idea, like when sources seek quote approval, we talked about that. Like, again, like this just kind of further elaborates just what I was saying before. Yeah, you don't need to, well, I see that a lot of people will say like, so-and-so said when talking about blah, blah, blah. You don't need to explain those things. That's what paraphrasing is for. You basically try to go into, before you go into a quotation, you basically like try to provide some sort of context or setup through paraphrasing. Okay. Um, you know, you want to avoid like, yeah, attribution, we talk about that. You want to avoid the, sorry, I lost my place here. A lot of places don't actually use like profanities at all. So you want to keep that in mind. That's actually like, not considered a good thing. I mean, if you want to put it in your stories in my class, I don't care, and we're students interviewing other students. You can be Rolling Stone and I don't care, It talks some more about the identifying sources. I already talked about that. Again, the idea with the book is to really kind of just like back up things I've already talked to you about. All right, so and there's 5. So that's chapter 10 right there. Okay, so there's really not a lot to go over because I've already talked about a lot of it already. So, All right, so you'll see where I am in terms of like things I need to talk to you about. So just make sure you're staying close attention to paying attention to the reading, which is listed on the assignments in Canvas. All right. So now once you get information for a story, that sort of thing, you get that information you need. I've talked a little bit about like the whole idea of like making sure that everything's attributed, making sure that everything is sourced. But at the same time, like then you have to go through the whole process of actually like determining like what is the story, okay? Like I was showing you before with the story about Samantha Brokaw, okay? So we need to basically identify Samantha and who she is, that sort of thing. But what is the story about? The story was about, how she's basically maybe some sort of an expert on lanternflies and why she's interested, okay? So, that's something that all those things determine like how to use a source and what information you're going to get from that source to turn into a story. That's something that comes out in your interviewing, okay? As I've talked about before, it's something that actually is you don't really know what the story is about until you're actually maybe like during the course of the interview itself. And so you'll actually like need to actually like come to the point where your story is like it's an aha moment, like an epiphany, and you say to yourself, okay, this is what I'm going to be writing about here because this is the unique and interesting angle here. Okay, what I like to say is that now actually let me go back to this, is that, and this is something I've talked about a little bit before, but let me talk about it again, is that every story again has an idea and then an angle. Okay, so the idea is Samantha Brokaw, right? But what about Samantha Brokaw makes it unique and interesting? So you need to like take it to the extra step that makes the story more narrow but specific but unique. And the thing is that she actually has this interest in lanternflies, and she wants to do something about it. And actually, even has gotten involved apparently in some Facebook groups and stuff like that. So that's what you need to think about in terms of like when you actually develop the source, use the source, and think of what idea you got from the source. And you won't need to think the last step essentially out of all that is to develop the angle for the story. And what I want you guys to do for your next assignment, and this part of the assignment is not graded, okay, but let me go to Canvas here. And like I said, your rewrite entry is here, but I have this here too. Now it says third assignment, fall 2021, ideas for your next assignment. Okay, this is actually going to be the ideas for the next written assignment, which is obviously not assigned yet. Just this is assigned. This is not going to have a grade attached to it, this part of it right here. But it's just going to say, it says being a journalist means it's being a self-starter. That means being independent, come with their own ideas. It also help you understand the importance of finding a unique angle in a story. So I want you guys to do this by Thursday, a bit of an unusual deadline because typically I give deadlines for, like Mondays, because that's when I release the actual tape lecture. But what I want you guys to do actually is to come up with like 5 ideas that are Rutgers related, okay? Rutgers, probably even student related. And because I want to see if you can actually think of those, hone things down into a specific unique angle, okay? And I want you guys to like basically provide them in terms of a list and send them to me and put them here in this entry right here in Canvas, okay? Like I said, this part is not graded, but what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to, so once you provide that by Thursday, September 20th, I'm going to look at those and come up with the best idea. Okay, and that person, whoever has the best idea, will get extra credit, which means that on your next assignment, you're going to get a grade higher, that person, okay? I know it's one person, but I'm trying to give some sort of incentive for people to really do this. And really, I want to see that kind of like effort in this class is that people will go that extra mile to actually like do something and do something well. And beyond the normal, just the writing of a story, okay? So the best idea will be your next graded assignment, which I will talk about next week. I will pick this, whatever that best story is, by next Monday or this month, whatever you want to call it, the October 4th, okay? All right, so a couple of basic things about picking your ideas, okay? Keep the idea simple, okay? No major investigations, okay? That people do that kind of thing. Like, don't, no, I'm going to go undercover at the Broward Commons and see what they put in the food, because it's funny. I've had people come up with that whole idea, like kind of reaffirming what I used to think was that, they used to think like, and maybe it's true that maybe there's something put in the Broward Commons food that makes people go to the bathroom. That's something I've heard about for years and years, and maybe that's true. But that's not that's not really what we do in this class. Okay, I want you guys to think of a topic that may be of interest to, especially like students. Okay, because that's the major audience readership in this area. Okay, I want you guys to think about something that's like of interest to them. I want the people to come up with their own ideas, so I don't want to necessarily suggest them out loud here. I'll talk about maybe that next week, but I want you guys to think of something that may be like almost like something that maybe deal with somebody's everyday routines, perhaps, to give a better hint there. Okay, for that next story. Okay, think about a story that could be done in a week. That's why I say like no major investigations of that sort or anything like that. Okay. Stories are about people, so theme your ideas around that require reactions, preferably student reactions, because they're the people mostly impacted by things that go on here. Okay, and not only that, but I'm also trying to think of you guys too. If you like try to think, I've had people say like, I'm going to do a story about this, maybe involving the buses or something like that. So they're going to interview bus drivers, but then the bus drivers are not allowed to talk to people. They're actually told not to talk to reporters, usually. So you want to avoid that. Okay, so just professors sometimes won't talk, or they're hard to get a hold of, or that sort of thing. I want you guys to do something maybe just where you can maybe interview like 3 to 5 students or something like that. Okay, all right, so that's what I want you guys to do by Thursday and submit it by then. Okay, and again, I will choose the next idea for extra credit. Okay, all right, guys, so that's really it. And I will have this posted and with an email and everything else by Monday morning. I hope you guys enjoy your week, and let me know if you need anything, and certainly let me know if you have any questions. Like I said, you should have all your stories back by the time I release this video. Let me know if you have any questions about the rewrite or anything like that, or any kind of help or guidance you need. If you want to schedule office hours with me, that's fine too. Okay. Thanks very much, and I will be talking.